Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name is Thomas Robertson, joined today again by Paul Brown after, well, it seems like every week we've had some major news regarding a potential takeover, but maybe it now feels like things have come to a head. We're finally getting a bit more clarity on the situation as we approach the end of the season. Paul's here to tell us a bit more about that today, but before we start, how are you doing, Paul?
Yeah, not bad. It's been an eventful few weeks. So a busy time for everyone, but look, the club is, for all intents and purposes, safe. So that's a good thing and a good place to start. I'm sure a lot of fans have been breathing a big sigh of relief, and hopefully there are better times to come.
Yeah, hopefully. And we're not just talking about securing safety on the pitch. There's, of course, we've spoken a couple of times now about the potential takeover from 777. Uh, I think it's fair to say you've come under some criticism from fans. I'm not really sure why, but maybe let's just talk about what is the state of play right now. I mean, today we're recording on the 14th. Not sure when this video will go out, but at this point in time, what is the state of play regarding 777?
Well, 777 appears to be a company in quite a lot of trouble. They've called in a firm of experts in bankruptcy. Um, and the two managing partners, Josh Wander and Steve Pascoe, have been removed from the board of the subsidiary company which runs all of its football operations. And that company is called Nutmeg and is now being run by Don Dransfield, who used to be part of the City Group. Um, Nutmeg basically holds all of the football clubs that 777 have ownership stakes in, whether majority or minority ones, and all of the decision making on those clubs and all of the investments in football by the company as a whole are made by Nutmeg and by the Nutmeg board. So on paper, Josh Wander and Stephen Pascoe are now no longer a part of that, and that's not just me saying that. That's been confirmed by the company themselves to us. So that is a fact. The other thing to factor in here is that the sale and purchase agreement, which Mashiri had with 777, and which has been extended several times because they failed to complete on it. Quite frankly, over the last few weeks, we've seen evidence of increasing desperation from this company in terms of its attempts to try and access cash, which it has been largely unable to do. Um, and it would appear that it's now in trouble. So we will see. I'm sure that the optimists at 777 will say that the firm of receivers they brought in also has experience in turning around companies, but it's usually a pretty bad sign when you have to do that. And the independent analysts that I've spoken to who have knowledge of this company say that you don't call them in unless you're going into liquidation, basically.
Yeah, and what impact is that going to have? I mean, on the rest of the footballing operations, we now know that the deal's kind of dead in the water between Everton and 777, but I'm sure we all saw the video of Standard Liège this week. I think their game was delayed or postponed because the bus was blocked. They also own stakes in Sevilla, a couple of other stakes. So is this now maybe, I mean, I'm not sure how much we know at this point, but is their footballing operation kind of collapsing now?
Um, it's hard to say that it's collapsing. I mean, that's quite a dramatic term. But what we do know is that they've been seeking buyers for some of the clubs in the portfolio for quite some time. There are multiple reports in the Belgian media over the last few weeks that Standard Liège has been for sale. But tomorrow, the 777 case will be heard in court in Belgium because they still haven't paid the last tranche of the money owed to the previous owner when they took over the club. And a clause in that agreement allows him to seize his assets back, which he is attempting to do. And if the court finds in his favour, he can reassume ownership of the club and 777 will be out, basically. So that's one to watch tomorrow. We know that there are other clubs in their group they have been trying to sell. And in all honesty, months ago, when we first started talking to people both inside and outside the company, we were told that Josh Wander and others were having personal meetings with potential buyers for the whole portfolio. This was before they got into um, serious negotiations with Mashiri, but they were certainly putting feelers out on the market to see if there would be any buyers out there who'd be willing to take the whole portfolio of football clubs off their hands. In the end, they couldn't find anyone. Um, and then even after pursuing the Everton deal, they attempted a capital raise, um, which we've seen documents for, stating that over 150 people were contacted, um, uh, with a view to trying to bring in investment into 777. They didn't get a single bite on that either, and the official word on it was that it was um, shelved while the Everton deal was ongoing, and that it would be looked at again at some point in the future. But I think the idea that 777 are going to be able to easily sell all of their football clubs at this point in time is possibly slightly fanciful, because the noise around them and the bad publicity and the issues the company are facing both in court and outside of it are going to make that kind of thing very difficult. The idea also that they can find other investment to keep these things going is again a problem for the same reasons, and I think that is why you're seeing an increasing amount of lawsuits from creditors who are trying to pull the plug on their agreements. The most dramatic being the one from Leadenhall Partners in London, who accused them of all kinds of things in that case. And that one seems to have had cut through, because I've noticed that whilst there are other cases that have accused 777 of fraud and lack of of various other um, practices all over the world, that's the one that media here seem to have taken and run with more than any other. So I think the cat is out of the bag now.
Yeah, and well, some people will probably be confused about why this has been allowed to drag on for so long. We've seemed to have had media briefings once a month saying that, the deal's really close to completion. It'll happen any minute. Interestingly, Richard Masters has been speaking today. He said that, look, it's not for the Premier League to decide, it's the owner's decision whether he sells to them or not. So why do you think that this process has been stretched out for so long, when all of the stories that we hear in the press are kind of overwhelmingly, well, I think it's fair to say, pretty significantly negative. And how has 7-7 been allowed to drag this on for so long, when I think everyone now with eyes can see that this was never realistically going to happen?
Well, what I would say is that, stories in the press, and including mine, should not be the only basis on which bodies like the Premier League or owners of football club decide what to do with their money, or their regulations. They might help. They might paint a picture, and I think we've certainly painted a pretty vivid picture over the last few months. Um, but these things should be happening anyway. These people should be doing their own due diligence into potential owners, and it's very clear to me, and has been since day one, that the way the current supposedly strengthened owners and directors test is written is not fit for purpose. I think if you spoke to people at the Premier League privately, they would probably admit that to you. The the fact that this has gone on for so long is in part down to the Premier League, and the fact that there is no rule anyone can point to, um, which, on the basis of the mounting evidence that everyone has provided during this process, would rule 777 or any of its individuals out of owning a football club. That, to me, I find pretty staggering, but it is the case. And it's also a fact that the Premier League, I believe, are um, playing a difficult game here, because without something they can point to in their rule book that is an automatic disqualifying factor, and anyone can go to the rule book and read it, there are disqualifying factors. There are none that I can see which 777 have directly fallen foul of yet. They might in the next few weeks. I would say that's even possibly quite likely, but there isn't one. And on that basis, I'm pretty sure that the Premier League were rather wary of getting sued were they to have said no. Um, some potential owners tend to be pretty litigious, some don't, but I'm pretty sure that that's an argument that may have ended in court if the Premier League had decided to say no on the basis of what they knew already. They do have a team of forensic accountants who have been all over 777 for weeks. And I think without them and without the diligence they've done, you may even have seen this takeover approved at some point. It's only with the work that people like that have done into the accounts and financials of this group that we got to a point where the Premier League were clearly not going to approve it unless they were able to pass a very stringent set of conditions, which I must say most of the people that I spoke to as soon as they saw those published, and we published them on Josimar first, immediately said there is absolutely no way 777 are ever going to be able to meet those conditions. Um, so, opinions may differ on the Premier League. I've also seen people argue that the Premier League can't say no. Well, they can. There are disqualifying um, uh, options in their rule book, and the previous head of the Premier League, Richard Scudamore, was known on various occasions to have bragged about the number of companies he has said no to. He once famously pointed to a filing cabinet in his office and said that's full of owners I've declined. So the Premier League can say no, but it's under very strict conditions. It's hard to explain this to people, but it would have been difficult for them to give 777 an outright no, I think, on the basis of what they have discovered so far. That's all. But in my opinion, those rules are not fit for purpose. It's one of the reasons why a regulator will come in and is trying to toughen them up. That can only be a good thing. And I thought it was interesting today that Richard Masters kind of extended a bit of an olive branch on that in his evidence today in Parliament, because he did seem to accept that there are limitations to what the Premier League can do when they're doing their due diligence, and that a regulator might be able to help them in that regard. So that's probably a positive. Um, but I think a lot of people have questions to answer, and it's been clear from reading between the lines of both public and private briefings from the Premier League that they were waiting for Mashiri to make this call. If you read what they said to the Everton Fan Advisory Board and you listen to what Richard Masters has been saying over the last few weeks, he has constantly been putting this back on Mashiri's doorstep. And in my opinion, Mashiri has been waiting for the Premier League to make this call for him, because I I am given to understand that there were penalties in the agreement should Mashiri be the one to pull the plug. And any reasonable businessman is going to try and find a way not to incur penalties, right? So Everton have been left in this ridiculous situation where where this takeover has been allowed to drift for months and months. The club has been allowed to become more and more indebted to this group, and no one has been willing to actually make the call, which I think is pretty cowardly on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, in regards to that debt, I'm sure people will now have questions about what happens next. We know that the club's seemingly in debt left, right, and centre, but well, maybe not the most prominent one. We will get onto MSP, but pretty much the most prominent one is now this debt that's just mounted up for months to 777. What what will happen to that now? This deal's not going to go through. I mean, the debt will still be there, but the club are going to seemingly just end up in this never-ending cycle of debt. Bearing in mind, it seems that 777 have just been kind of propping up the club for the past season. Now that they seemingly won't take over, they're surely going to want that money back.
Yes, but I don't think the picture is as bleak as you paint. Um, that's just my personal opinion from talking to people in and around the situation. So let's start with the debt. The debt that's been accrued from loans by 777 is a problem. It's a problem for various reasons. It makes the club less attractive to outside investment, and the ultimate source of that debt is still in question. Where did that money come from? We've seen documents which prove that at least some of that loan money has come from ACAP, which is a holding company that runs five insurers in the US. So essentially, it was investing US policyholder funds from widows, orphans, pensioners in a football club. The regulator in the US, whose responsibility is to look after that money and make sure that it is invested safely and securely, is currently going through the process of evaluating those loans. That is also an issue and a problem. Loan money apparently is still coming in. Whether that's coming in directly from 777 or from ACAP or from another source, we don't know because it's difficult to follow the paper trail. One recent loan we were told came in from an entirely new entity, which had not been part of the process before. But whether that is an entity connected to either 777 or ACAP, we can't be sure. It looks to me like although the sale and purchase agreement has ended, that there is almost certainly a separate agreement for this loan money, which 777 would be in danger of defaulting on were they to stop providing money to the club. And I think that's why you are seeing this slow drip feed of smaller and smaller amounts still going into Everton. That may not be able to continue for much longer when you consider that 777 itself has had to call in a group of receivers to restructure the business. So we will see. So that money is a problem for those reasons given. However, the documents that we saw show that this loan money is not due for repayment until 2026, unless certain things happen. And I suspect that the certain things might be the subject of a lawsuit at some point. So that again is a complication, but we will see. Why I'm trying to paint a slightly rosier picture is that I think everyone is well aware now that this takeover cannot proceed. All parties for the first time, and I'm including the current owner, the creditors, and 777 themselves, are well aware that this takeover cannot proceed. On that basis, the door is now open for other bidders to come in. What happens to 777's loans is a big question mark. It's possible that someone would make them an offer basically to go away. I think it's highly unlikely that any new investor would come in and say, I'm repaying these loans, especially if 2026 is a cast iron legal date which can be stood up in court. But there is a path for an investor to make an offer to 777 to pay some of it off to take that problem away. Regardless of that, the thing that fills me with optimism for Everton is that I know that there are currently good people with strong love for the club who are trying to do the right thing and see it through. I know a lot has been said about the prospects of administration, and that is still a danger. It can't be denied. But in my opinion, from talking to people around the club, I don't see a stakeholder involved in this process yet who wants to put the club into administration. So the likelihood of that happening, I believe, is slim. There will be people who tell you that the club is essentially operating insolvently because it's requiring these loans for working capital purposes to keep going, and that is not a sustainable situation. And there will be, by the same token, people who tell you, even if that were true, the club has enough money to see itself through to the transfer window when assets can be sold. Both of those things are not mutually exclusive, but it means that the club has some breathing space. And I believe that the club will, in the next few weeks, be in the hands of a new owner where it can be recapitalized and taken forward. It's just a question of the right people making the right decisions, um, and the right bid being made, which is attractive to enough people. The kingmakers here ultimately are MSP because they have this charge over Mashiri's shares, and they have the only loan that currently matters because it's still not been paid off, the 158 million loan, and which way they decide to jump is going to decide Everton's future. We've written in Josimar about two other US groups who expressed an interest. Um, my understanding is that one of them around Christmas time essentially decided to back away from making a firm bid because they were concerned about the level of debt and various other things on the books. Um, that potentially removes that group, but I would not say that interest has completely gone away. There is another US group fronted by someone who has a very deep knowledge of Everton indeed, who is still out there. And I think you cannot rule out the possibility that both Andy Bell and George Downing may decide to do something themselves, although we've been told consistently throughout this process that MSP as a group do not want to own Everton long term. Um, Part of the issue there is that MSP is quite a wide variety of investors. Um, it's not one focused group with a clear goal. I think a lot of those people put their money into Everton for different reasons. I believe Jeff Morad probably did want to be the owner of Everton when this all started, but I don't believe the rest of his backers were of the same opinion. And Jeff Morad can't do this alone. And I'm told now that MSP as a group do not want to own the club. So if they were to do something, if they were to activate their clause, take the shareholding, if they were to make Mashiri an offer, whatever form that takes, it would more than likely only be a short-term option before the club is flipped to another investor. But my reasons for optimism are that I think people are now beginning to understand that the limbo we had with 777, where the club was slowly falling into more and more debt, is over now, and that takeover is not going to happen, and it is opening the door to a better way forward.
Well, that sounds very positive. I mean, that's always tremendous to hear. And you mentioned George Downing and Andy Bell there. Now, it seemed that George Downing was in the director's box at the weekend. You mentioned that they might do something. I believe, have they worked together with MSP before, or was that just a coincidence, the timing of I can't quite remember what the system was when all those loans came back
I
in. But
don't I don't think there is an existing relationship there. I think the club had a genuinely big problem with cash flow um, at one point, and Bell and Downing came in and basically did a deal with MSP to come in on their loan to help solve the problem on a short-term basis. So they now have money tied up in the club too. Um, it's not people may think it's significant that he was in the director's box, but both of those guys have been at matches on a semi-regular basis, I think, for some time now, and for they care about the club and they don't want to see it either go into administration or out of business. So I think it's important to be aware of that.
yeah, okay. And just my final question then, I think, we could speculate on potential new owners and potential deadlines, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of time to do that probably over the summer. But I just want to address this story that's kind of emerged today about Luma Capital coming in and offering a loan of 150 million. Now, that kind of does seem a bit confusing. I'm sure fans are maybe quite standoffish to that idea that the club's just going to get laboured with more and more debt. But what did you make of that news today?
Um, I think the bottom line here on that story is that there is no one at the club for whom an extra 150 million loan into the stadium side of the business makes sense. And on that basis, it's almost certainly not going to happen. None of the creditors want that to happen. The owner doesn't want that to happen. So if that story is correct, and I have no reason to question Bloomberg's reporting, I'm sure that they were briefed that by a source that they regard as reliable. But I think it's extremely unlikely that another lender is going to be allowed to come in and make a loan like that. It wouldn't make any sense for the club, really.
Hmm. All right then. Well, Paul, thank you very much for your time. The 777 deal is seemingly over. There are potential investors waiting around the corner. There are plenty of reasons to be positive. So thank you for coming on and talking to me about them.
No problem. I would just say before I go, obviously I mentioned the transfer window, and Kevin Thelwell has mentioned the transfer window too. It is a fact that the club is going to have to sell players. That's a fact because of its PSR position as much as its ownership position. So it is potentially going to be a difficult summer in terms of the transfer market for Everton. And I know Thelwell has been banging the drum for the fact that he's in profit so far, and I believe he hasn't done a bad job, to be quite honest. He's right to say so, but the profit he's talking about over the period for the year ending June 2024 is basically only around £600,000. It's a drop in the ocean compared to what the club needs to raise. So players will have to be sold, whatever happens with the ownership situation. That is, potentially not good news, but I think people need to focus on the fact that Everton's future is at stake, and it needs to be in the hands of someone who can take it forward, who can bring investment into the club and make the right decisions. That has never appeared to me possible with 777. It is possible now, and that's the bottom line.
Excellent. Thank you all very much for watching. Be sure to check out the rest of the videos on the channel. Be sure to check out Paul's social media where you can find out way more news about the club all the time. And as mentioned, thank you all very much for watching and join us next time on the Toffee Blues.